show's ready to go. Good evening, everyone. How are y'all tonight? Thank you. Welcome to Monday Means Community, presented by Emergent Savannah. Held on the second Monday of every month, Monday Means Community is a way for people to gather, discuss, and learn more about the civic and cultural life of Savannah. Thank you all for being here. How many people are here at an Emergent event for the first time tonight? Raise your hand. Thank you all so much for coming. Please come back. How many people are here at the Bean for the first time tonight? One. That's good. Please come back. Well, welcome. Thank you so much for coming. Just a quick few housekeeping details before we turn it over to our lovely panel. June and July are quickly lining up with some really great projects for us. Our next Monday Means Community will be held here at the Bean on June 13th. The Politics of Place, People, Planning, and Possibilities. A conversation on what development in Savannah means and what we as citizens can do to get involved before the COA signs go up. This will be featuring Tom Thompson, Director of the MPC, Kevin Klinkenberg of SDRA, Brian Madsen, an urban architect, Harold Yellen, a zoning attorney, and Mary Landers of the Savannah Morning News. It's going to be a really good one. We encourage you all to come out. We are also working on a show called The Artist of Social Change Walk, an interactive art show highlighting some of Savannah's great but lesser known activists from the past and change makers that have really impacted the city. We are slating this for July, so keep posted. You'll notice on the wall tonight there is a slightly posted phrase out here, time to act. We just want you all to think about this phrase tonight. Tonight, if you hear something that matters to you, ask yourself, what do I care enough to do about this? Fill out a sticky note, give us your information, and post it up on this wall, and we'll contact you. Everyone in this room is an activist, whether you realize it or not. Lastly, I'm incredibly excited to take this opportunity to announce that Emergent Savannah has been awarded a $5,000 matching grant by a gracious donor. The grantee will match all donations up to $5,000, and as of today, we've got $3,000, so it's a really big deal for us. We ran on a budget of like $1,200 last year, so like $10,000, we're like, woo! Like we can go to the moon, we feel like. I mean, we can do stuff. A more professional note, this grant and your accompanying support will enable Emergent to move ahead, not only with our many projects like Monday Means Community or Conversationalists in Residence, but we'll be able to offer free workshops, more collaborative opportunities with places like Hodge Elementary and the Savannah Youth Ambassadors. Without the grant and without your support tonight, this would not be possible to do for at least another 1 to 2 years. So we're 22 days away from this June 1st deadline, and having raised about $3,000, almost halfway, we need your help. You have one of two opportunities tonight. There's a flyer on your table or your chair that tells you how you can support us if you want to do so. You can make a donation online or by mail, or you can just find one of the ES organizers. Everyone raise your hand. We're in and around the room. You're more than welcome to find us and talk more about how you can help. Or perhaps you noticed the more fun opportunity tonight, which we've actually put up. We had, in an attempt to sort of make light with the rising tides, we had a little jar out with water. Basically, it was $1 for a rock, and whoever made it overflow kind of won a little pot. We're not doing that now, but we're going to go over to the American Legion afterwards, and I guarantee you, with a beer, this game is going to be way more fun. So I encourage you all to come out. Now to the meat of why we're all here tonight. Tonight's panel, Rising Tides, the invisible and inevitable impact of our coast. Much is to be said of our coastal home, but what often is left unsaid is the fact that our tides are rising. However you feel on the issue, it's happening. What will this mean for the coastal empire? What will this mean for the low country? And what is the city of Savannah doing right now? Our facilitator tonight is Ben Mayer. Round of applause for Ben. Mari's from Savannah, Georgia, and grew up playing in the maritime forests and salt marshes of coastal Georgia. He's earned a BS degree in marine science and has an MS degree in marine science, both from Savannah State University. He's very active in his community and currently is a wetland biologist with the state of Georgia. His work focuses on wetland assessment methodology, wetland habitat use, and soft green shoreline stabilization techniques. Please welcome Ben Mayer, your host for the evening.
I'd like to introduce our panel. First, to my immediate right is Dr. Clark Alexander from the Skidaway Institute of Oceanography. Dr. Alexander is a native Californian who, after growing up in LA and earning his undergraduate degrees in oceanography and geology at Humboldt State University, traveled across the country to pursue his graduate degrees in marine geology at NC State in Raleigh, North Carolina. He met his wife of 30 years, took a position at Skidaway Institute in 1989, raised two extremely bright 20-something-year-old daughters, one of which is graduating this Friday coming up, and give a big round of applause for that. And this July, he will serve as the interim executive director of Skidaway Institute. Dr. Alexander has been involved with conducting research and advisory efforts with focus on coastal management needs and sedimentary processes in coastal, estuarine, and continental margin sedimentary environments at the local, state, regional, and federal levels throughout his career. It's supposed to be 2 sentences, but that's
2 sentences.
2 very long sentences. I had the good fortune to have Dr. Alexander as a professor in my graduate career, and it was a wonderful experience. And to his right is Jackie Jackson. Jackson has worked for the Chatham County Savannah Metropolitan Planning Commission for 13 years and is the Director of Comprehensive and Natural Resources Planning. She came to the MPC via Fort Stewart/Hunter Army Airfield, where as a biologist and environmental planner, she managed the military installations drinking water and wastewater air quality compliance program for 6 years. She now actively works with 7 local jurisdictions in Chatham County and oversees the stormwater programs for these areas to ensure compliance with state environmental regulations. Her current focus also includes coastal policy on sea level rise and natural resource protection, as well as issues such as food deserts, resiliency planning, and greenway systems. To her immediate right is Mayor Jason Bilterman of Tybee Island. I've known Jason Bilterman since he was the mayor pro tem of Tybee Island. Bilterman received his undergraduate degree in political science from the University of Cincinnati and his master's in education from Xavier University in Ohio. He is a coordinator of the baccalaureate program at Johnson High School and is married with 3 kids, Maria, Nora, and Hannah. And Mayor Bilderman and I have shared many waves together surfing on Tybee. So this is an opener question for everyone. Just to start, we're at this point where we know tidal flooding and sea level rise will dramatically increase in the U.S. East and Gulf Coast communities over the next 30 years. Can you each talk about a bit your role in this inevitable change and how you are taking this on? We can start with Dr. Alexander.
Good evening, everybody. So, basically, as a coastal geologist, my background and training is in geology. So, the way I'm approaching this issue is one of coastal processes, trying to understand what's happening, what are the important processes that are driving the changes that we're seeing in the coastline, and trying to determine what will the changes be in the future. We always look to the geologic past to try to understand what's happened in the past as some sort of a indicator, a model, if you will, to help us understand where things might be going in the future. And based on that information, what I try to do is communicate what we've learned by looking at modern processes and what's happened in the past to the people that are planning for today and for the future, so that we can take advantage of what we're able to understand about past processes and apply them to our planning into the future. And so that's why I get involved with people like Jackie here, who is very interested in having that kind of understanding integrated into the planning process.
I'll build on that. That's exactly where I was going to go. As stated, I'm a planner with the local jurisdiction here for Chatham County, City of Savannah. And with that, we really look at the policy side, which should be your foundation for everything, to ensure that you're continuing to build and preserve those resources as they need to be for the long term. But I look to folks like Clark for the science side of it. These guys are local, which we're very fortunate to have Skidaway here in Savannah and Chatham County to use as a fundamental resource for us to get our really good educated information from, so that we can build on that for the long term. And then I get that information and pull that into our policies, such as building codes, ordinances, zoning, that type of information, and then pass that down for the long term.
So I've been mayor for 10 years out of Tybee. It's been an interesting and enlightening experience for me. And sea level rise is something that we have been dealing with now. I think on two fronts. Number one, we're trying to do what we can to set an example to things like Solarize Tybee that was started by former councilman Paul Wolf, who did a great job. Spread that out to Chatham County. A lot of people basically were people bought in bulk and got a cheaper deal on putting solar panels on their homes, putting in energy efficient systems for our city. We got a stimulus grant to put in a geothermal system for a lot of our city buildings, things like that, knowing that what we do is just a tiny, tiny pinprick on the problem. And that really solutions are going to happen at the state, the national, international level. More importantly, on our end, trying to plan for the fact that sea levels are rising. We had a study that was done, just was completed about a month and a half ago that showed what the impacts on Tybee may be and what we can do about it. Most significantly, I would think, is Highway 80. I think you all may have seen the video and pictures of 80 completely flooded during a king tide last fall, I guess. So we're trying to use that information we got from that study to advocate to raise that roadbed up when it is eventually fixed 5-6 years down the road.
Very cool. Thank you. So the next question, again, is for everyone. You guys did touch on it. So what really had to happen for this to bring it to the forefront in your respective worlds? Was there one instance where you saw a figure or a table or a photo that said, "And we got to talk about this"? And it's up for grabs. If there was one defining instance.
I guess I'll take that on a little bit. I wouldn't say there was one instance per se, a driver. In any way, my particular focus day in and day out happens to be drainage and floodway protection. So it's something that we're continuously talking about in-house and within our arena, and it's just, especially obviously being on the coast, it was coming up more and more. We were starting to see the science behind it. Where 10 years ago we weren't necessarily talking about sea level rise, but all the drivers were starting to come into play. So it really just became that topic that we were either going to get in front of it or we were going to be behind it. And the mindset was we need to go ahead and prepare now instead of react later.
Anybody else like to add on that?
I got to go to a thing ironically called Rising Tides. It was in New Hampshire. There was this organization that was put together by a nonprofit called Rising Tides, and they brought elected officials from the local level, not to talk about what's causing it or any of the politics of it, but what are we going to do now to deal with this situation, knowing that it's happening. And there were mayors and county commissioners and stuff from basically the Gulf Coast, Texas. I was down. We were talking about sea level rise. I was eating dinner with a guy who was an alligator hunter in Texas, who happened to be the mayor of this small town, and here we were talking about what we were trying to do to address this issue. It was nonpartisan, and that opened my eyes up to the fact that it's not just us here locally dealing with it, but other places all over the country are having to address this issue.
I sort of came to the realization of the need to bring science into management peripherally. It really wasn't an aha moment at all. It was when I was serving on the Coastal Marshlands Protection Committee, and there were many times when the committee would like to have said, well, that's too big, or has too much of an impact on the environment to any given specific project. But the first thing that would get trotted out by the applicant's lawyers would be, so show us your science. Where's your evidence that what we want to do is going to be too much of an impact in one way or another? And that was my first step, because I said, well, shoot, anybody can do this kind of science. We can look at what the impact of docks are on the marsh side. And so it was that point that I started doing research that was much more management relevant and focused on issues of importance to management of the coast. And sea level rise being one of those. So that's just one of the areas that I've tried to work in over the years.
And I think just to add to that too, as a personal note, having been born and raised in Savannah, you hear the stories, and even Highway 80, it's one in President Street Extension and that type of thing. I don't remember as a child having that happen, Highway 80 being flooded over throughout my childhood or whatnot, but now we're starting to see it more and more often, of course. And it just started to really spark those questions in my head and started to reach out to other groups as to what's going on, what are the numbers, what is that science behind this that we need to know at the local government level to ensure that we have our processes in place where they need to be.
Very good. Thank you all for those insightful answers. This one goes to you, Ms. Jackson. How's Savannah preparing? And how has the issue been integrated or prioritized in the comprehensive planning?
Good question. Well, there's actually quite a bit that's been done. And what is often hard to see is a lot of the work that's come out of the agency. And we're just one piece of the puzzle. The Metropolitan Planning Commission really only holds, I guess, the key for unincorporated Chatham County and City of Savannah. There's all the other jurisdictions that are out there as well that are also doing great things, such as Howdy that we've been involved with and others. But as much as possible, we try and get all the players to the table, all the jurisdictions. And we've been working for at least 6 or so years, having those discussions, bringing these groups to the table to just start talking about it is a huge effort. But we're starting to change the policies, the foundations, looking at, again, building code, height differences, do we need to build higher in certain locations, etc. But we've also started getting other associated programs in place where we're starting to look at preserving areas and protected lands along waterways and beaches and areas where you should be allowing for migration over time for those waters to come in and out, as well as delving into what's termed the CRS program, where you're looking at flood insurance programs and those type of things, getting all of the jurisdictions on board with that. For the first time, we have all but one of our jurisdictions are now in the CRS program and have flood insurance. So that's as of last year, so that's a big effort. And there's a lot that goes into that effort. And then, of course, the homeowners get discounts on their flood insurance. And we've also been working with organizations that you typically might not think about, or you might, such as SEMA, which is our Chatham Emergency Management Agency, to look at developing plans, worst case scenarios, even with hurricanes, how do we want to redevelop our community? And those are very, very tough questions to be asking, but it's something that as a local government we have to start putting out there. So there's a lot of behind the scenes foundational work that we're working on right now to keep us moving forward in the right direction, hopefully.
All right, thank you. This question is for Dr. Alexander. What is the long-term history of this issue, and how does it affect the big picture context? And do you have any projections for the future?
Well, as anyone who's been following this discussion in the greater world out there, there will be people that talk about changes in sea level that we've had over time. And when you start looking at it on a geologic time scale, there have been very large fluctuations in sea level. Over the last 2 million years, we've had many fluctuations on the order of 300 or 400 feet. The last time sea level changed very dramatically was about 20,000 years ago. Sea level was about 300 feet lower than it is today, so the beach wasn't at Tybee. It was another 70 miles further towards the ocean, because when you lower the level of the water, it all draws in towards the middle of the bowl, as you can imagine. So sea level rose, and that was all because of ice being locked up, water being locked up in ice on land. Sea level rose relatively rapidly after that point until about 4,000 years ago, when it was about 1 meter or so, 3 feet, about 3 feet within our modern sea level. And then the rate slowed down to something like what we see today, a few millimeters per year. What's going on today you can look at the Fort Pulaski tide gauge. That data is available on the web. And in fact, you can look at every tide gauge in the U.S. On the same website, and I can give you that web address later on if you're interested. But sea level here in Savannah is rising at just around 3 millimeters per year, and we have about 75 years worth of data in the Fort Pulaski tide gauge to support that rate. And then we also have satellites that circle the Earth now, which are actually measuring. Sorry, let me back up just a second. So all these tide gauges, like at Tybee, that's where you have a rod stuck in the ground, and there's a float that sits on the water surface and records what the level of the water is. Now, that's called relative sea level because if the land sinks or the land rises, you're going to think the sea level is changing, even though it might be sitting still. And in fact, there are places around the world in high latitudes where the sea level is falling because the land is rising up after all that glacial ice has been removed from the continent. So it's actually pretty cool. And there are areas in the country where sea level is rising much more rapidly than it is in general because the land is sinking. Places around the Mississippi Delta where there's a lot of compaction naturally of sediment, where there's excuse me, removal of water and oil and gas from the sediment, also removal of sediments that would be coming in to renourish the delta area, which are being shunted to sea by the management of the shipping channel in the Mississippi River. So there are differences that you see around the world that are much greater than the real rate of sea level rise in the ocean basins. We're monitoring that rise in the ocean basins using satellites, and they give us a rate and all they do is measure how fast the surface of the water is rising out away from the land. And they give us a rate of about 3 millimeters per year as well. So what we're seeing in Savannah is roughly equal to what we're seeing in the ocean basin. So we aren't seeing significant levels of sinking or rising or anything like that in the Savannah area. Now, as you go further north, there is a hot spot in sea level rise rates up in northern North Carolina, up through Chesapeake Bay, and that's because of geologic factors. And so they have a rate that's about twice what we are seeing here in Georgia. Estimates for the future, you've probably all seen a lot of these plots that start out very low and then they start ramping up very quickly, all going out to 2100. All of these are based on models and assumptions of how things are going to change, and these models get bigger and better every time we do focused research trying to understand the different processes that are going on. One of those processes is melting of glacial ice. So the last time they did a big revamping of the models, we didn't understand how fast ice melts, like Antarctic ice sheet, Greenland. And that was back in the 2007 IPCC reports. We didn't understand it, so it wasn't included in those models. So those sea level rise estimates were underestimates. Now we've incorporated the rate of ice sheet melt, so we have a better idea of how fast sea levels are going to rise if our understanding of all the processes and feedbacks between the different parts of the environment are correct. The models that we have today suggest that something on the order of a meter to 1.5 meters is probably a reasonable estimate for how much sea level will rise from 1990 levels by 2100. So we're looking at 3 feet of sea level rise, whereas the historic rate of sea level rise would have been about a foot over that 100 years, given our earlier rates of sea level rise.
Thank you, Dr. Alexander. This next question is for Mayor Biltram. How did you and your council come up with the decision come to the decision that rising tides was an issue that Tybee would have to deal with?
This answer won't be nearly as good as that answer, but I'll try. It is frustrating that apparently people at high levels of office are not listening to you, people like you. We are. So I don't think it was any one thing necessarily, just to build up over time and reading the newspaper and realizing, I believe, weren't you advising that Senate subcommittee thing we did about beach erosion, and you did a slide presentation, that was what, 8 years ago? Yeah. We were looking at ways to fund beach renourishment. He came out and showed me that. That was the first time it kind of slapped me in the face, what we're dealing with here. But I think at the local level, those are the people that are having to deal with these things, and will ultimately lobby folks at higher levels to start taking this issue a little bit more seriously. Just to give you an example, on Tybee, we have a beach renourishment program that is expiring in 2023, so the feds pay for 60% of our beach renourishment that happens every 7 years if funds are available. And that program runs out in 2023. So we've had our last renourishment. The last one was a 10-year renourishment, actually. But the federal government has this flood insurance program, which you referenced. How many of you pay flood insurance? Yeah. How many of you have seen premiums go up a little bit? Oh, wait, most of you? So the feds don't seem to understand that the payouts they make for the federal flood insurance program, like in Hurricane Sandy, Hurricane Katrina, that's led to the insurance program being about $21 billion underwater. That if they built dunes, right, in front of coastal communities, like some communities in New Jersey did, and they didn't have much damage, therefore there weren't much FEMA claims that were paid out in those particular communities from Hurricane Sandy. If they would somehow combine the Army Corps' shore protection program with the FEMA program, we could do more to protect Tybee and other coastal communities from getting wiped out by a hurricane. Things like that I think need to be done, and I'm actually optimistic that that stuff is going to start to happen as more local officials are get involved and more people speak up. I am optimistic that those things will actually start to happen. Even though Congress seems completely dysfunctional, they seem to be getting things done lately, and I'm hopeful that things will get done for the betterment of all of us on the coast soon. And to sound a little cynical here, I think as multi-million-dollar pieces of property start to get affected on the coast, more things are going to happen.
But the problem with that is that there are only so many federal dollars to go around, and how many multi-million-dollar properties do we have here versus further up in the Northeast, and who's going to get the attention? That's my concern, is that will there be room at the table for small communities when big power centers and investment centers are really showing risk?
Thank you both. This question is for everyone. This issue has been heavily politicized. Really? Never would have thought that. Which often leads to a political stalemate or an unease to bring the issue out front. So how do we get past that barrier, and have you guys had experience with that barrier? I have, so.
I know, just coming here, I had one person say, if you get involved with this, it might look like, Tybee has some issues and real estate. I don't know that that's necessarily the case, but I know North Carolina dealt with that. North Carolina State Legislature wanted to make sure that coastal communities didn't get engaged in things like this for fear that it would affect real estate values on the coast. But largely, people on Tybee have been pretty supportive of us trying to do everything we can to deal with this issue. And obviously, it's not Tybee. I mean, there are places in western part of Chatham County that if it's just a slow sea level rise, they will be inundated before Tybee is. Tybee's 9.8 feet above sea level on average. Parts of Miami are way below that. The Outer Banks of North Carolina is 6 feet above sea level. So relative to other parts of not only the county but the country, Tybee's actually in better shape than many other places. Doesn't really answer your question. If it's politicized, I think it's overly politicized, it's crazy, but I'm optimistic that things are going to actually start to get better.
And I think even if it is somewhat politicized on Tybee, you guys are the poster children for how to try to address it and work together. I mean, I hope you'll have a chance to talk a little bit about the work that you guys have done out there before we leave tonight, because it's just fantastic. The other thing I wanted to say in answer to this question is, yes, it is politicized, and you need to try and handle it with as much tact as possible. But the way that you are able to get beyond that, at least in my experience with this issue, is that you have to try to find a way to relate what you're talking about to people's everyday experience. The best day of my life in a long time was when I was talking about sea level rise to the MPC, and one of the developers who was on there that will remain nameless stood up and said, yeah, you know, I've had these marshfront property for a long, long time, and I see this marsh coming up into those properties, and there's less and less upland. And he got it. He saw it in his own experience, and he realized it, and that's what will convince people that this is something that they need to pay attention to. So you have to find a way to relate it to their experience.
I'll echo that. That's exactly where I was going to go with that. For some time now, it's been a hard discussion, obviously, at the local level and politically. And for a very long time, whether we liked it or not, we weren't really allowed to say climate change, sea level rise was not a discussion that was really had. So I had to find a way to relate to the community, to the residents, to those around us, if you will, that maybe would not be as political. And what seemed to work for the most part was just the discussion of local flooding. If you were born and raised in Savannah or been here long enough, you know the streets flood. We have issues, there's big capital improvement projects that have been going on for some years to try and handle those projects, and I would relate it to flooding. Like, not talk about why it's happening or how it's happening, just the fact that it is indeed happening, and it's in your front yard, it's in, in front of your offices down State Street, downtown, South Side, you name it, it's happening. And that would be the way for me to kind of get the foot in the door and talk about how we can address it. And through the policy side, we've really started to look at, again, drainage, looking at what's termed green infrastructure and low impact development, where you look at different alternative approaches to design and construction, where you're basically getting back to doing what Mother Nature has done for so long, and water's infiltrated through the ground systems, and that's how we're trying to move, or the direction that we're trying to move in. But it really took that discussion of getting past the flooding, if you will, and people are obviously talking about it more and more now, which tonight is great. Any chance to talk about sea level rise is awesome to me, but just the fact that we're even here, we would not have been talking about this 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. It just was not happening. But that's how I personally addressed it, in our department and our office as a whole.
Thank you all. And that ties into this next question. So there's this larger perception of what the issue is, but what about the other facets of what this issue brings? For example, in Savannah, since we have drainage systems designed 100 years ago, there's a direct linkage between rising tides and efficiency of stormwater systems, which is a planning issue, but also a public health issue. What are the facets of the issue that you think are must?
Well, sorry, I'll chime in on that one too. You absolutely addressed a huge issue, and Jason and I both hinted at it as well. Our infrastructure locally, a lot of it is very old, heading all the way out to West Chatham County, even to Bloomingdale and those areas. We recently did an outfall study throughout all of Chatham County, which means you're really looking at those larger pipe outfalls that lead to bigger water systems. And every single community in Chatham County is in some way affected by tides. There is a saltwater effect in some way. So at some point, the water is backing up into their systems, and it's what's called surcharging their drainage system, so the water has nowhere to go. So we're seeing that across the board. So we're having to really plan, again, looking at green infrastructure and the way things used to be done and handled, plan differently as a whole. But I think you're also looking into, we can't just think in silos either. We're forced to think outside the box and more comprehensively. We have to start looking at the effect on drinking water systems as well. Our water systems here in Chatham County, we primarily pull drinking water from the Florida aquifer. Our water tables are also extremely high, so 2-3 feet and you're hitting water here in Chatham County. So when you start talking about salt water starting to come this way through tides rising and that type of thing, you're starting to affect our drinking water sources. So where does that lead us with our mindset? How do we plan 30, 50 years out as well? And these are all things that we're addressing, albeit slowly, but we have really been looking at it for some time now as a county, not just as a city or municipalities, but as a region, if you will. We're actually starting a process in the fall to relook the entire effort to not just look at sea level rise and stormwater components, but again, also drinking water components and land use and zoning and all these different policies. Because again, you can't just think in one little bubble, you have to look across the board.
And Jackie brings up a good point, that as sea levels rise, the water table rises. So there's a lot of systems that are on septic, a lot of homes that are on septic all along the coastal system here in Georgia. And as water tables rise, all those septic systems become less and less efficient. And so that has been alluded to, that can become a public health issue, not only a convenience issue that you can't flush the toilet when the tide's high. And from an ecological standpoint, as you have salt water intruding, there is a small perched freshwater lens on most of the little hammocks, all the little islands that we have here along the Georgia coast. And as sea levels rise, salt water intrudes further in and contaminates even those small perched aquifers as well, not just threatening our drinking water in the major aquifers. So it has implications for the maintenance of biologic communities in the marshes as well.
What we're trying to do at Tybee is, governments love funded studies, and I would argue that many, many times those studies that cost the taxpayers a lot of money just get put on the shelf, and the next mayor, whoever comes in, nothing ever happens with it. So we're trying very hard to not only do these studies, but actually to do something with them. So, for example, we tried a kind of an innovative tide or a valve check system, basically. We spent a whole lot of money on it. We had issues on the south end of our island, in our neighborhoods, where when it rained a lot at a high tide, there was some serious flooding. I mean, going into homes, things like that. So we spent a lot of money on this system, and it's actually helping us with our flood insurance premiums. And not only is it helping with drainage issues, but but that takes an investment and a little bit of a roll of the dice on that one if you when it came out, and it worked. Relative to saltwater intrusion, we went up to the governor's office for years, basically saying, look, we're going to have, Hilton Head's already experienced saltwater intrusion, so they tapped into something called a Cretaceous well, which is almost a mile deep. Water comes out kind of hot, with a little bit of salinity in it, so they have to treat it. We made the argument, as the state continued to cut the amount of water we were allowed to use. Did any of you used to use showers at Tybee, at the dune crossovers, right? We had to take those out. And the Vox Populi says that we're a bunch of cheapskates for taking them out. But the reason we took them out is because of the EPD threatened us with $20,000 fines every day if we didn't stop, if we exceeded our water withdrawal permit. So what we're doing about it is the governor and the state has partnered with us, and there's a $5 million deep well going down a mile to the Cretaceous well to get us a new water source. So we will have more water. Hopefully we'll put the showers back up soon. The county's working with us on that. So like I said, we're just trying to not just study things, but to actually take action on it. And I think it's hard to get anybody on Tybee. If I have people in a room who are Tybee people, and I have some Tybee people out there who agree on anything, it's almost impossible. I guess that's true anywhere, but it seems that's more true on Tybee for some reason. But everybody agrees that Highway 80 is a problem. Huge problem, right? And there's a tide gauge that sits there right by Highway 80, and it's a fact. Facts are stubborn things. This is a problem, and we all agree it needs to be fixed. So now we're doing everything we can to get that road raised and widened and the bridges replaced. But one big aspect of it is the flooding, and it needs to be raised, and we all miraculously on Tybee, I think, agree on it, which is kind of nice.
I'll add to that too, something I found interesting and kind of thought-provoking at one point. Again, looking at the different aspects and really pulling in health and safety side of it is when we started to see more and more flooding out at Tybee. The police department and EMS were then having to station ambulances at Fort Pulaski knowing that the roads were going to be flooded over in case they could not go and assist when needed. And that's something that changes all different levels of processes that we just haven't necessarily thought about. But again, you have to ensure health and safety for the residents. So it really kind of trickles down. There's a huge domino effect when that happens.
Awesome, those are all great inputs to that question. Another question for everyone is, how do we prioritize this? Is it being prioritized? And what is being prioritized? And kind of leave it up to whoever wants to take it first.
I think some parts of it, like the Highway 80 thing, are getting prioritized. I can tell you, I was at an event Friday, this past Friday, in town. So I drove back about 8:30, 9 o'clock to Tybee, right? And you all may remember it was a bad rainstorm that night. It was really ugly weather. And the tide happened to be high right as I was driving back. And I almost got in a head-on collision on the Tybee Road Friday night because the water was above part of the eastbound lane. There was water above it. You couldn't see it because of the rain and stuff and how dark it was. And I started hydroplaning a little bit, in my car. That's scary, And we're supposed to have protocols in place to deal with that, notify people and close the road and this, that, and the other. Well, that didn't happen that night, So that type of thing needs to be prioritized. That road needs to get raised. So I would argue that is one aspect of it. But we did a study too, the study about sea level rise and its effects on Tybee, and it said long term we should raise our water levels. Well, we're not really prioritizing that because we don't have the money to do it, and it's kind of a long-term, long-range, meter to meter and a half by 2100 kind of thing. So some things are getting prioritized, and some things are kind of on the long-term solution list.
I'll add to that. At the local level, there are two different processes that are in place. Recently, the county as a whole completed its first strategic plan, where it really got a lot of community involvement to figure out goals and strategies for the community as a whole. And again, for the first time, the entire county, all of the jurisdictions were involved in this process. And out of that came specific goals and strategies, of which some of them directly related to sea level rise for the first time, and really started looking at specific projects, capital projects, that type of thing, that needed to start happening, or build on what's already happening, if you will, for the local governments. And for the first time, county commission, as projects come forward, will be looking at this strategic plan and the goals and strategies to see, okay, is this meeting the goals or meeting the strategies that are laid out in the strategic plan? And if not, what do we need to do differently to make that happen? So we've never collectively kind of looked at a plan to see if it was meeting the needs of the local community as much as this. So it's a big step. It's coming down to dollars and funding for capital projects. So it's a big step that's starting to happen at the local level.
And really, I believe, the big question is, we're building infrastructure that can't be moved. And, so you've all probably heard that you really have no erosion problem until you build something that can't be moved from the shore. It's just a natural process. The shoreline is changing, the shoreline is moving, the shoreline is adapting to the physics that are being imposed on it. But once you build a wall, build a house, build a condo, build a whatever, then you have an erosion problem. So the prioritization that I think that's important is that you need to look first at the longevity of structures. And I think that we're starting to see that with Chatham County. If you're going to put in a sewage treatment plant or a water treatment plant or a civic center or something that has a lifespan that's longer than a 30-year mortgage, because a house, maybe it'll get demolished, maybe you can move it, but very, very large municipal infrastructure, those are the things that have to be prioritized to take into account where will sea level be in 100 years, because this structure will still be here, and we're going to be dealing with the fallout from higher water levels if we don't plan for it in the present.
Great. And we have one final question. And at the beginning of this talk, we all heard that from Courtney that everyone in this room is an activist. So I posed to you the question: what can citizens do to prioritize this?
Well, for my part, I've got a few websites up that I'll show at the end after everyone else has had a chance to have their say. But I just feel that the best thing you can do as a citizen is arm yourself with all the good information that you can find. These websites that I'll show you all have information on coastal hazards, proposed and modeled inundation, a number of different kinds of information that are really very useful to you as a citizen in planning and evaluating your own vulnerability.
I think two pieces. One, as a resident, educate yourself on your property and your community as a whole, and get the history of your community, where your flood elevation is, what type of flooding events may have happened, and wherever you live in the county, highly support the idea of have flood insurance. I don't live in a flood zone where you typically have flooding, but I have flood insurance because I live in Chatham County. It's just a very smart thing to do. And then go out and ask your resident, or ask your friends and your elected officials what they're doing about it. I think the reason we're up here today is because of the grassroots discussions that have started. We've, at the local level, we've started hearing policy changes from the federal side of the house, but we get more done in Chatham County from the grassroots so many times. I think we need to keep asking the questions to our elected officials, what is being done to make sure that our property and our community as a whole is going to be here intact, preserved for the long run.
I would say just get involved. Your brother's running for county commission, right? Yeah, plug for Felix. Run for office, vote. I'm proud on Tybee we have 60, in municipal elections, which occur on non-presidential election years, we have 60 to 65% voter turnout, which is one of the highest rates in the whole state. And I see other places in Chatham County, I won't mention names, where it's like 15%. So get involved, vote, make sure your voice is heard. I know that there's a lot of people who give us a lot of feedback on Tybee. Oftentimes it's a little frustrating. Now it's not just phone calls, it's text messages, emails, Facebook messages, Twitters, Instagrams, whatever. It's constant. My phone's ringing right now as I'm speaking. So get involved. There's more ways to get engaged and more ways to communicate with your elected officials than ever before, I think. And it's a good thing for you all. It's more difficult when you're on the elected end, but it's a good thing overall.
I agree. Just to add to that, I think being at the staff level, we get more done by the citizens asking the questions and probing. And I mean, they can hear me preach all day long, but yet when someone from the outside comes in, or a clerk comes to help me, give a presentation or something, it just seems that, they listen a little bit more. Probably shouldn't be saying that, but that's okay. But I also think it's, this is our community. We should be asking the questions and doing the right thing for the environment as a whole to ensure that it's protected for the long run. I mean, we all live here for one reason. This is a beautiful area to live. And we want to keep it this way and preserve it. And there's a lot of things that need to happen to keep that going for the long run.
Excellent. All great comments and insights on this. You want to show the website? Or
Yeah, sure. So there's a couple different websites that I think you all should be aware of. The first one is the NOAA Sea Level Rise Viewer, which will give you a view of projected sea level rise. Well, I'm going to go up there to get it now, or launch. Right here. I would just say, yes, I accept that I'm not going to sue you if I get you. And so basically what the NOAA Sea Level Rise Viewer, it's got data for the whole coastal U.S. It has elevation data, and they've used sea level rise models to model where sea level will go in. And if you want to zoom in to Georgia, that would be great. And you can see what you're seeing right there is probably the modern sea level, and you can raise sea level by 1 foot increments. It's over on the left-hand side. We're not seeing it on the screen. We don't worry about it. But so you can raise sea level by 1 foot increments up to 6 feet above modern mean high tide. So you get some idea of what areas will be inundated, and it will also give you a little graph for inundation frequency over time. So that's one that I can really recommend to you. If you just Google NOAA sea level rise viewer, you'll get to it immediately. Okay, so what we're seeing is a strip of the coast. So here's the barrier islands, Cumberland Island, St. Simon's Island, and then Savannah is right up there. What we're seeing right now is the blue area is the modern high tide level. And if we were to, and if you zoomed in, you could see a lot better. You can zoom in way in on this thing. And what you can do is, if we were to slide the screen over, no, the other way. There you go. Can you go more? There you go. See, so you can zoom way in here, but if you go all the way over to the left side, all the way over to the left side, let us see the left side. No, don't zoom in. Slide the whole thing over. There you go. Oh, well, I guess it must be a thing with the screen here. But basically, there's a box on the left-hand side. It says, you know, you can click on 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot, 4 foot, 5 foot, and you, yes.
That's 3 millimeters a year. What does that equate to?
That's about it. Well, so you have 2.5 centimeters per inch. So you're talking about 10 years per, about an inch per 10 years. Yeah, but so you can really zoom in very closely here. If you click on that picture, I think it'll give you a picture of what something will look like at high tide or something like that. But so you can see, this is what it looks like at high tide now. Oh, she went up to me, okay. Oh, there you go, okay. See, so it's a great tool. And basically it just shows you, based on elevation, if you because it knows the slope. As you raise it 1 foot, it knows how far it must move inland because of the slope of the surface there. And so you can do that for here up to 6 feet of sea level rise. So this is a great tool for if you just want to look at inundation. And like I say, it's coast.noaa.gov/sea level rise, SLR. And we can write these down for folks if they want them later on. Okay, let's leave that one because I don't want to keep people here all night. SAGES is the Savannah Area GIS project that's run out of the MPC. And you just click on this, okay, you want to do that one? And say, sure, I won't, yeah. So, let's see, over there on the right corner, yeah, layer list, turn the layer list on. So there's all kinds of layers you can turn on to look at where are the parkways, where are the benchmarks, where are the evacuation routes, where are the census plots, where are the flood zones, where are the school boundaries. So there's all kinds of data in here that Chatham County makes available to the citizens. There's also elevation data in here as well. So yeah, there's your flood zone. There's elevation data, I guess it's not out in here right now. At different levels of zoom, you get different contour of elevation. So that's another tool that's available to anybody that wants to log in, and you get a lot of good local information. And that's just sagis.org. And you can talk to Jackie about that if you have any questions. All right, let's leave that one. Let's go to the last one, the Coastal Hazards Portal on the far left. Oh, good. Well, maybe I won't say that this is my web portal, but I am behind that. Since this is a map. But basically, I'll tell you, what we did with some funding from the DNR was put together a Coastal Hazards Portal that has, it does run on an old version of Flash. I've never seen that on a PC. So if you're a Mac person, you're out of luck. But if you're a PC person, you're still in good shape. But basically, what the coastal hazards portal does, it has elevation models, it has flooding maps, just similar to what you saw in NOAA. It has armored shorelines, if you want to know how much armoring is in the coast. It has hurricane tracks. It basically, oh good, there you go. Okay, now you have to go to the Georgia Hazard Portal and say, yes, I will not sue you if anything, or, oh. Can you get there? Or move that window up just a little bit. There you go, now you can read. All right, so this is vaguely disturbing, but there is a large number of files, overlays that you could look at. Everything from the bathymetry of Wassaw Sound, which is something we mapped recently, to a coastal hazard assessment for the whole Georgia coast. And basically, all you do is click on the plus next to the one you want to look at, and just click on the one. A DEM is a digital elevation model. Click on the next plus. There you go. Now click on that. There you go. And that will put on a color elevation map for the whole Georgia coast, so you can see the elevation gradient. It really shows you very well how the seawardmost barrier islands are very, very low, and then things get more and more higher in elevation as you move landward. But there are a number of different data sets in here. There are people that have lived here for a while on the Georgia coast. There's some really great imagery of damage from Hurricane Dora on St. Simon's and Jekyll Island. That was the last hurricane in 1964 that did extensive damage to the Georgia coast. It came ashore in St. Augustine, but we got the brunt of the waves and the erosion. So I'd encourage you to go here and just look at the different layers. There are a number of things. Oh, there's shoreline change rates. So if you want to know what the erosion rates are anywhere in the coastal counties of Georgia, we have erosion rates for all the major tidal creeks and the shore front and all those kinds of things. And so this is the Georgia Coastal Hazards Portal, and if you Google that, you'll get that address as well. Okay, and I'll be happy to talk to folks or play with some of this stuff after the talk, but I don't want to keep everyone here. But I just want to reinforce, there's lots of data out there where you can be informed of your vulnerability and the vulnerability of where you live, and you can be much more informed citizen in planning for sea level rise and other kinds of hazards along the coast.
And I'll just add, again, to kind of echo, with all this information that's out there, again, as a community, I think we need to continue to expect better. Expect better development, and not even better, but just good enough development. Expect, I don't even know what I'm trying to say, actually. Just expect better, if you will. We've gotten stuck in our old ways for so long, but when we really start looking at development, that's how I continue to always think development and drainage and runoff and that type of thing. I mean, everything is accountable, and it's not just water quality that is affected by all this. Kind of going back to one of the questions, there's also ramifications of water quality that is pulled into all these type of discussions as well. So look to your neighbors, look to developers, look to elected officials, and always ask the question, is there a better way? Or are we doing the best that we can as a community for this type of development and growth? Of course, we want to protect our resources and meet in the middle and have economic, growth as a whole, but I think we can continue to do better along the way as a whole.
And as a scientist, I'll say I'm very encouraged by there is really a thirst for good scientific information for making better decisions on the part of managers and government, in my experience. So I don't think that government is turning a blind eye or deaf ear or whatever analogy you like to using and incorporating the best science and best guidance they can use.
Agreed. Can we give these guys a big round of applause?
Now do you see why I call him in to the meetings? He's the scientist.
If anyone has any questions, feel free to ask away.
I don't really have a question. I'm sorry. I've lived in Savannah for the last 3 months, but I'm from San Diego. They had a really big problem with erosion in this community of La Jolla. And a lot of it was linked to the fact that they isolated themselves. It's one of the wealthiest parts of San Diego. They isolated themselves from public transportation by not letting the trolley go there. I've been riding the bus in Savannah for the last 3 months, and public transportation and bike lanes, I feel like if you get the support you need to actually raise the highway and also be like an more eco-friendly city as a whole. I don't know. It seems like there's a strong community of bikers here, and
There's a lot being done on bicycle stuff in Savannah, actually. There's a thing called the Savannah Bicycle Campaign. They're real active. There's some folks here, but they have done an amazing amount of work, and the county is listening to them, and they're doing a linear trail on the Truman, right? And at Tybee, we've done all kinds of, we're in the process of, it's cost a fortune to build a bike path over marsh. I mean, it's amazing. It's taken us 4 years to get a permit to do it, but we are going to have, eventually you'll be able to ride your bike from Wilmington to Tybee on 2 new bridges with segregated bike lanes, right, on the rails and trails. Hopefully that's not like an omen for the bike trail.
There's all the excitement.
You will. Things are happening, but I encourage you to get involved with them. And public transit's a tough one.
Well,
Sure.
What came to my mind when she was asking that question, and maybe you know, does it provide a lot more impetus for a project, a roads project, if you're going to accommodate a lot of alternative transportation on that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It adds to the cost, but I mean, people right now ride, I see them all the time, ride their bikes on Highway 80, and I've done it once, and I will never do it. You did it once too? We did a thing where we got involved with the Bicycle Savannah people, and we did this thing where we got a bunch of people, we rode from Tybee City Hall to Savannah City Hall to raise awareness of it and stuff like that, and never again. It's not safe, but it does lead you to, it gets you more points on getting the money to get the thing done.
And I'll add, I think, just it's becoming more of a requirement now for projects as you move forward, both at the local and state, even the federal level, to at least look at what we call complete streets and walkability, bikeability, that type of thing. We just finished the first countywide project of looking at canal systems, looking what would be the possibility for those that have the capability of putting in passive trails along those canal systems, your major ditches, that type of thing, as well as rails to trail areas and whatnot, similar to areas in New York and Atlanta and beltway systems and whatnot. So for the first time, we're really collectively looking at the county as a whole, trying to think outside the box. And we really do have some good fundamental policies in place for that. But I think, again, that grassroots, decision for folks to get out there and ride their bikes, and we've got a beautiful community. Everyone should be out there walking and riding and enjoying that as a whole. We just need to ensure it's safe. But we're going to continue to see that more and more, definitely.
Did they deny public funding for beach renourishment because they weren't providing public access to the beach?
The
Is that the issue?
city of La Jolla did not want, it's the most expensive place in San Diego to live. And I think Tybee is pretty isolated in terms of Highway 80, just that one highway you can go there. And it's beautiful, and so is La Jolla. But because they denied the trolley going there, they didn't want the trolley trash coming to the nicest beach in San Diego. That's kind of how they isolated themselves a little too much from the community of San Diego. So that's how they overcame.
We can't get renourishment money from the federal government unless we have public access.
I think they did it by going through it was like wildlife habitat rebuilding is how they approached it, because there's a lot of snorkeling.
I think any chance that a neighborhood association like Troy Neighborhood Association, we have about 40 to 50 people that come to our meetings each month, which is the second Tuesday, and if you're in the Victoria neighborhood, come to run up. But we would love to have an abbreviated version of this. This is wonderful, and I just think that so many people in our particular neighborhood would benefit from hearing. Sure.
honestly, to again continue the discussion, I know Emergent Savannah was the one that kind of brought this group of panelists together, and they would be the main contact, but I know for sure that at any point, I think that's absolutely doable, for sure.
What was the question?
We've got to repeat the question.
The question was within, and we're kind of delving off a little bit, but I can answer the question. The question was, are there any plans in the countywide strategic plan for improving public transportation to include bus stops and that type of thing? I'll say yes. And that there's a strong working effort between CAT, Chatham Area Transit, as well as the local jurisdictions. I know Jason can probably talk on this a little bit with regards to the funding of that. But within CAT-specific goals, they're specifically looking at locations and the routes, as well as looking at trash cans, covers, benches, those type of things, ADA compatibility and whatnot, to figure out what they're missing, what they do and don't have, etc. So that discussion is being had. Yes, that's more on the transportation side through CAT and the MPO, which is the Metropolitan Planning Organization. But those discussions are definitely happening for sure. Yes.
This gentleman.
Hey, I guess this is a question to all of you, but it's pretty apparent at the top levels who the people that are against conversations on climate change are. The gas companies, the oil companies, all those people. But on the local level, who are the people that are calling you saying, oh, hey, don't talk about this because this is going to threaten property values? Like, what institutions and individuals and people are in positions of power that are trying to stop the conversation and change? I mean, is it like the developer lobby? Who are those people?
I've been in office for 14 years.
Okay.
And I really haven't had much opposition to having a discussion and coming up with solutions.
Yeah.
Really. Now, that being said, development is just because of the economy for the last, since 2008, this slowed down significantly. But even before then, never really had an issue with it. I think I'm optimistic, like I said, especially at the local level, that local governments are just dealing with it, And it seems to me the blowback is more at higher levels. On TV, when you get the one person it gets ratings up, from Fox News or MSNBC, but two people on either side of the issue and they fight about it, instead of sitting down and saying, all right, let's figure out what are we actually going to do to solve these problems, which is happening, I think, locally, and I'm optimistic it will happen nationally eventually. I hope.
I'll add to that a little bit. I hope I don't get in trouble. But as I mentioned before, having discussions, I've had to, figure out how to sell it, if you will, the discussions over the years. And honestly, the biggest discussions have come with Home Builders Association, realtors, and developers. And I won't even necessarily say developers, because for the most part, nationwide, if you're getting larger developers, they're used to this discussion. They're used to certain building standards. But at the local level, when we're starting to make things more stringent, real estate agents see it as an additional cost or a fee that's tacked onto the cost of a home, and then home builders as a whole see it as an additional cost. However, I will say, again, because it's like anything else, we're starting to talk about it more, it's starting to become more of a normal conversation. Those are dwindling, those opponents, if you will, because it's becoming a requirement. No ifs, ands, or buts. This is the way we're doing business moving forward, so get used to it. And unfortunately, those have been tough conversations. But that, for me, has been the group that I've been, had the most pushback.
The only practical one we had was when we talked about doing a freeboard, it's called. So you have to have like If you want to participate in the federal flood insurance community rating system, which I know is getting the weeds, but if you live in unincorporated Chatham County, because they do such a good job on doing things to mitigate flood damage, you get 25% off your flood premium, which might not sound like much, but if you're paying $10,000 a year, which some people are for the flood insurance, that saves you $2,500. And one of the things you can, Tybee has 25% too, which we're very proud of. One of the things to get to that 25% is to force people to build not just above base flood elevation, but a foot above base flood elevation. And so we did have an argument on Tybee 4 or 5 years ago about that, and we decided to do it, to go up another foot to require people to build a little bit higher. But I didn't see it, it wasn't really in the context of sea level rise so much, it was just...
It was flooding.
Yeah, it was flooding, and some developers didn't want to have to build another foot up, you know? But we said, well, you're going to build another foot up, and so they do that. And it's not a big deal.
And again, because Tybee fought that fight and Chatham County fought that fight, now it's the norm and this is the way we're doing business as a coastal community. But it took governments like Tybee to really push that forward. And it was a battle, I know, and he's playing it off a little bit, but it was, I mean, it had to be done, you know, to protect your homeowners, to protect your residents, and your resources.
That's right.
Yes.
You mentioned rising the sea level of a meter to a meter and a half by the end of the century. And that would mean that the sea, 5 foot landscape will become beachfront. How you want to be around. There's a website that's, if you're not familiar with, Sentient is the sea level analysis by Climate Central organization. It has all the same information as a melon. There's interactive maps. You can put in a postal code and all the coastal and east and west coast. And we project 2 feet to 7 feet. But we run it to 5 feet. But the thing of it is, we can have all these projections and know all this information, but the cause of it is global warming, greenhouse gases, and if we don't stop the power plants production of that sort of thing, then it's inevitable. Also, Al Gore says we'll be able to overcome.
Yeah, so he was commenting that there is another website that I actually purposely omitted from my recommended list of sites, which is called Surging Seas. It's something put up by Climate Central. The reason I didn't put it up so that if you do go look at it, they do a lot of good work, but they tend to over-sensationalize everything that they do, so that they come off as a little bit more dramatic and a little bit less rigorous in their scientific, the way they present the results. So I don't encourage people to go there just because it's a little bit more alarmist than a site that's saying, here's what will probably happen based on our best understanding as opposed to the worst case scenario. Because I don't think it helps the conversation much by always playing to the worst case scenarios.
What it does point out is the greenhouse gases, a worst or least scenario, unless something's done about that. The least the scenario is going to happen.
Well, I do think that there's some good news from the standpoint we did have the Paris Agreement, which had 196 countries agree that greenhouse gases is the problem. The problem is that we as Americans have not led that discussion, okay? And so until we sort of get serious about reduction of anthropogenic greenhouse gases, that's the real 10,000-pound elephant in the room. But in light of that reality, you have to agree with 2 sides of the coin. One side of the coin is reduction of emissions of greenhouse gases. The other side of the coin is that there's already change on the code that you have to plan for. You have to already plan for the change that's already in motion. So you have resilience on one hand, and then you have adaptation. But I do think on the global front, there is momentum. The question for us is how we can get on the boat.
Well, let me mention this. Miami is planning to become...
I'm going to suggest we get to a question in the back and you guys...
Yeah, well, he did say a meter to a meter and a half. It's 5 feet by the end of the century.
You did say that.
Yeah, and how far will that bring the water in from the ocean?
Well, basically, when you want to briefly estimate what that'll be, the slope of the coastal plain in general is about 1 to 1,000. So if you think about 1 foot of rise, then sea level will come in about 1,000 feet. So if you're talking about 3 feet of rise, you're talking about 3,000 feet, so less than a mile. So the climate central, if they're saying that Tybee going to be underwater with a 3 foot rise in sea level, they're just wrong.
Question in the back, plaid shirt.
Yes. What is the plan for Highway 80? What's the time frame?
His question, I think, was, what's the plan for Highway 80 relative to raising it, you mean?
Yeah, what's the plan to raise it or to fix the problem of flooding, and what's the time frame?
Well, I'd like to say the time frame was not what it is right now, which is, right now they're saying 5 years. Because to get the permits, so we have this issue, right? That it's not on the Tybee's jurisdiction, it's unincorporated Chatham County. It's surrounded by marsh, right? There's waterways in there, which is an issue with Coast Guard and things like that. And then it's on federal land. I don't know if you realize that, but that entire causeway is part of the Fort Pulaski system, right? It's a state and a federal highway. It has every single bureaucratic obstacle known to man in its way. So it's not that the will's not there, it's that it's taking forever to get the permits to do something that everybody knows needs to be done. So the plan right now is, and I would like it to be 4-lane, I just think that's the solution, because I think that'll make it safer and get ambulances off and on and all that kind of stuff. Right now it's a 2-lane road, 3 lanes in certain spots. And to have emergency lanes on either side, new 2-lane bridges, and right now they haven't determined how far they will raise it. I asked that question recently, how high are you going to raise it? They said, well, we may just raise it based on what the extra asphalt's going to be. I'm like, what are you talking about? You know? So we sent them that study that was done by, I forget the name of the organization, the Sea Grant we got that did the study. So we sent the DOT to that study, and they are actually doing some modeling now to see how high they need to raise it, which you would think it would be at least 3 feet above where it currently is right now. Right now the projection is 5 years before construction starts. And then of course construction is going to take a while too, and that's going to be a mess.
Thank you.
All right, I think we're going to cut questions off and hold those for afterwards. I'd like to give these guys one more big round of applause. Thanks to Emergent Savannah for hosting such an awesome event.
The resources Dr. Alexander mentioned will be on our Facebook event page, and also we're headed over to the American Legion afterwards. We encourage you all to come and continue the conversation. Thank you.